The Denver Broncos' initial roster is set at 53, with being subject to change throughout this week. Who were some surprising cuts? Who's the backup quarterback for this Broncos team? And much more. You get that on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody for making Locked on Broncos their first listen of the day or your first watch, whether you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you're watching us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, my friend, the Broncos' initial 53-man roster is set. I say initial because it will change more than likely on Wednesday, could change Thursday and Friday as well. There is no final 53-man roster really till we get to that first week of the NFL regular season. Some surprise cuts. The Broncos now have their backup quarterback to Russell Wilson, and we got a lot of great insight from General Manager George Paton and Assistant GM Darren Muji about why the 53-man roster formulated the way that it did.
We really did, and it was great to hear from them. It's great to hear kind of just their philosophy on roster construction and different hints to what could be yet to come. We'll kind of wait and see there, but certainly a really fascinating day for the Broncos. Really, Cody, I think we went into this day maybe expecting a little bit of unexpected, but nothing too crazy. I think even the trade that we're going to talk about later is something certainly that a lot of people saw coming. So definitely an interesting day, but really one of the bigger pieces of news is what the Broncos decided at the quarterback 2 position. And obviously Brett Rypien, he's won that job. He went out there. You and I had kind of talked throughout the offseason. It kind of felt like training camp going into that first preseason game. Maybe Josh Johnson's got a little bit of an edge, but Brett Rypien kind of really took that job, I guess, over the course of the last few weeks here and impressed the coaches enough to the point that he's no longer going to be running that scout offense during practice during the week. He's going to be the backup quarterback going in to game days, which is cool for him. Congrats to Brett Rypien on that.
Well, and it's huge for Brett because even Brett mentioned after the game on Saturday against the Minnesota Vikings that 3 years in a row he has not made the 53-man roster. He's always been brought back after waivers initially for this team. So I think it's just a testament to Rypien, doing and putting in the work. And I think this is an offensive scheme, to be honest with you, Sayre, that I feel like really benefits what Rip does well. And I think we saw that all throughout training camp. We saw that all throughout the preseason. When it came to moving the ball downfield for this offense, the guy who did it consistently was Brett Rypien. And this was not just a preseason display. Being there every single day of practice, I noticed this with Brett Rypien. Every time he came in, he moved the ball down the field when he was under center for this Denver Broncos football team. So he will be the backup to quarterback Russell Wilson, and that meant that Josh Johnson got released initially. Now the Broncos' hope is that they bring back Josh Johnson onto the practice squad, Sayre, which I think is a very, very big thing for a guy like Johnson and just how supportive these guys are in this room. I imagine, unless Johnson gets an opportunity to go somewhere and maybe start or maybe be a backup somewhere, I could see him back here in Denver. But I think this also raises the question, with 800 plus other people being made available on the waiver wire in the next 24 hours from various NFL teams, could the Broncos maybe look at another quarterback or any other name out there on the waiver wire?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do, won't it? Just to kind of find out what are the pro scouts seeing across the league, because I think there were quite a few preseason, top performers at the quarterback position that did get cut. A couple of guys that really kind of caught my eye, Cody, over the course of just watching a bunch of different preseason games. The New York Giants cut Davis Webb, who looked really good for them. I saw him make a throw on Sunday against the New York Jets that I was like, dang, like who's this and what did he do with Davis Webb, right? So maybe he's made some strides there. I'm sure the Giants want him back for the practice squad, but a Trace McSorley, an interesting potential fit for this offense, with his ability to get mobile, get outside the pocket. So who knows? We'll kind of see. Tim Boyle is a name that was thrown around. He has history with Nathaniel Hackett. Who knows what Blake Bortles is up to these days? He seems to be one of Hackett's better pals in the league, right? So I'm just joking on that one. But in all seriousness, it'll be cool to see what the Broncos do, because with 16 practice squad spots, I feel like you have a little bit of, superfluous flexibility, if I can say that. It's kind of like, well, what are we going to do with all these spots? We have so many. So you could afford to bring in another quarterback if you feel like he could be a good fit for your system.
Well, and I think that'll be the big thing, and we heard from Darren Muji, George Paton, their pro personnel department, their college scouting department, like they're gonna have a very busy Tuesday night, or they had a busy Tuesday night scouting over everybody. They had profiles on almost every player that was probably on their kind of wish list in a sense when you talk about waivers. I mean, at this point in time, the Broncos can add up to 16 players onto their practice squad, and only, I believe it's 6 total vested veteran spots, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm excited to see what they do on the practice squad. We'll obviously have you covered here, the Locked On Broncos podcast on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or on YouTube as well if you prefer to watch us over there. We have a brand new look visually if you're watching on YouTube. Hope you enjoy it. Make sure you comment down below whether or not you like the new visual setup that we have going on. But you know what, Sayre? There were some other roster moves that were made by this Broncos team to become compliant from 80 to 53 on Tuesday, including a trade of a impact player that has been contributing for this Broncos team. We're going to talk about maybe some of the surprise cuts that surprised us the most on Tuesday ahead of the 53-man roster deadline. You get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about LinkedIn. And as you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people that you want to talk to faster and for free. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors, and LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And our good friends over there at Prize Picks. And for week 1 of the NFL season, I will be taking Russell Wilson to throw for more than 300 passing yards, Derrick Henry to rush for more than 85 yards, Cooper Kupp to score more than 1 touchdown, and DK Metcalf to catch less than 5 passes. With Prize Picks, you get to pick 2 to 5 players, and if they go score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's one word, LOCKEDON. So if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. All right, Sayre, let's continue on today's episode. Locked On Broncos, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts or whether you watch us on YouTube. Thank you so much, Broncos Country. Make it Locked On Broncos your first listen or your first watch of the day. Roster cuts usually entail some surprises. There were many around the National Football League, but for the Denver Broncos, were there any shocking roster cuts in your opinion?
It had to be the fact that Kendall Hinton got waived, Cody. I think that's the most shocking thing to see Kendall Hinton. We've kind of been talking about him a lot this offseason, and I think a lot of people have just how much better he looks, right? He looked really good as a route runner. He showed off some nice skills at the catch point against the Dallas Cowboys, that big touchdown that he had in the first preseason game. To me, and against the Buffalo Bills, I know nobody really had a great game against the Buffalo Bills, but to me, Kendall Hinton was constantly getting open, constantly getting held, drawing some penalties. I was surprised to see him out there into the fourth quarter, or into the second half of that third preseason game against the Vikings, and you think maybe, well, is he kind of a trade candidate? Could they try the Trinity Benson deal, like they did last year with the Detroit Lions, and get some draft picks for a guy like Kendall Hinton? But ultimately, they did not do that. They ended up letting him go for nothing. And obviously, I mean, you hope to get a guy like that back on your practice squad. But for Kendall Hinton, if the Broncos don't view you as a top 6 wide receiver at this point, are you going to come back? I mean, it's been 3 years. So to me, I can't help but wonder, even if he does have the opportunity and clears waivers, I can't help but wonder if Kendall Hinton, to me, the most shocking cut of the day, if he won't decide to go elsewhere. But I know there were some other guys around this roster too that could be worthy of this distinction.
Well, and we were even thinking wide receiver Brandon Johnson, right? The undrafted rookie free agent out of UCF that just had an amazing preseason, an amazing training camp, and got a lot of run with the starters during training camp practices with Russell Wilson. He was designated as waived injured. Now, I think a lot of people thought initially that this means that his season, because he's waived injured, there's an injured reserve element to it, that on cut day, if you made that move, they're out for the entire year. This is not the case here with Brandon Johnson, and so he's on the waived injured designation, but they will look to come to terms on an injury settlement, which at that point, then they can bring him back onto the roster and bring him back onto the practice squad if they want to, Sayre. So Brandon Johnson dealing with the high ankle sprain, just unfortunate timing. But when you saw like the initial move, you mentioned Kendall Hinton, we were all surprised. Brandon Johnson, that was a surprise. And we're like, okay, what's the wide receiver room going to look like? Well, that meant that Jalen Virgil made the 53-man roster, the undrafted rookie free agent out of Appalachian State. I know, Sayre, after the NFL draft, when we recorded an episode, you're like, I've got my eyes on this guy to make the 53, and you know what, my friend? He came through, and like I said, Saturday, got to talk to Jalen. He said, I've never been in this position before, so I don't know what to expect, but he talked about how he's learned a lot about himself throughout training camp, coming in and OTAs competing, how he's dealt with some adversity. Now he's on the 53-man roster, continuing the trend that the Denver Broncos have had. There were some other surprising moves as well. Netane Muti was a surprise release for this Broncos football team, though, Sayre. As we know, he's dealing with the knee injury. There is the expectation that he'll be brought back onto the practice squad and will maintain a spot there. Denver's got a lot of maneuvering that they're going to have to do, though, I think, when that time comes, because now they can start placing players on short-term injured reserve, including Greg Dulcich, including Michael Ojemudia, who made the active roster. And that also kind of led to some other surprise cuts, right? Tight end Eric Tomlinson, who had a really good offseason and preseason for the Broncos. And surprise, Mike Purcell was among the surprise cuts, as General Manager George Paton said. These guys were taking one for the team there. So this was procedural only. They will be brought back onto the 53-man roster on Wednesday. And you know what? They got practice on Wednesday and Thursday as well. So procedural moves, those guys, Dulcich, Ojemudia, to IR. Not much of a surprise there. They just want to get those guys ready for that Week 5 matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. But I will be intrigued to see what roster moves get made at that point in time. But it is good that Mike Purcell will be brought back and Eric Tomlinson.
It is. It's great to see. And 9 News insider Mike Kliss also reported that they're going to get their base salary, the remainder of whatever it is, whatever the financial ramifications of them being cut. George Paton, the general manager, said like these two guys, they kind of just took one for the team, which is really cool to see. And I think, Cody, maybe one other surprise that maybe some people might have would be the fact that McTelvin Agim, the 3rd-round pick, after what he showed against the Minnesota Vikings, he was also let go. The Broncos are subjecting him to waivers, and even if he does clear, it's another situation where, again, you're a former 3rd-round pick of this team. They haven't given you the greatest opportunity over the last 3 years. To be honest, I mean, let's just be real about that. I think with the Vic Fangio regime, they didn't give him the fairest shot, and Agim, he has a lot of work to do in his game, but certainly a player that I think is talented enough to warrant getting claimed by some other team, especially on a rookie deal. So McTelvin Agim, the 3rd-round pick in the 2020 NFL draft, one of them, along with Michael Ojemudia, who you already mentioned, McTelvin Agim is out on the Broncos roster this year. So kind of a bit of a surprise there. But certainly I think over the course of the entire offseason, we didn't hear enough from him. He had that one big game like we talked about against the Vikings, but you got to look at the whole body of work. And unfortunately, it's a tough numbers crunch with a roster like this.
And George Paton really investing and going with this year's draft picks, Inyoma Uwazurike and Matt Henningsen. And he said that he was confident in the Broncos' depth at the defensive line. He was asked about that in the press conference. And he had, he was just very positive. He said, I feel really good about where we're at. We got 6 guys. We're going to bring back Mike Purcell. So you do have that presence there. I mean, Denver is deep at defensive line with the amount of guys that they have. So I'm excited to see how things kind of play out here for this Broncos football team. But another move that happened, and maybe not as a surprise move, but Malik Reed was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, ironically enough, on yesterday's episode of Lockdown Broncos, we kind of floated it out there as, hey, maybe Pittsburgh would be interested in Malik Reed, especially if George Paton is looking to trade him because of the injury to TJ Watt and the fact that they really don't have a lot of depth behind them. I believe after Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, it was Derek Tuska, former Denver Bronco, that is on their roster now. Well, now Malik Reed gets to join and reunite with his former teammate in Tuska over in Pittsburgh. The Broncos, they sent over Malik Reed and a 2023 7th-round pick, and in return, they received Pittsburgh's 2023 6th-round pick there. So George Paton, wanted to do what was best for Malik Reed. He said there was a little bit of a log jam at that position, especially with them keeping, look, you have Randy Gregory, Bradley Chubb, Nick Bonito, Baron Browning, Aaron Patrick, who made the 53-man roster for his special teams impact, and not to mention what he also was able to do against the Vikings, and Jonathan Cooper, who I know you were very nervous about potentially being released. Very, very interesting thing. Your thoughts. I just want to say I want to wish Malik Reed the absolute best. He's an absolute pro to cover. He's always been great to me, and I want to see him succeed, and now he gets a chance to go and maybe earn a contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
He does, and I think that's the number one thing that we should be looking at here, right? I mean, the Broncos do have excellent depth off the edge, and I think that was a big question mark for people coming in, but Randy Gregory, this is a great sign for his health. You obviously had, Baron Browning making great strides. Nick Bonito had the great game against the Vikings, and then, of course, guys like Patrick and Cooper. So really that logjam is, and that's one way to put it, right? It certainly was exactly that, and for Malik Reed, like you said, you go get an opportunity with a team like Pittsburgh, he could be their third rusher, Cody. So, I mean, essentially, the Broncos have given him an opportunity. Now, you go make that same amount of money that we were going to pay you instead of cutting him and having him sign for less elsewhere. Now that he's getting paid the same amount of money, a little under, I believe, 2.5 million or so. It's roughly that, the restricted free agent tender that he signed. And now he's getting to make that same amount of money in Pittsburgh where he can go and make more money after the season. I think it's a great trade for the Broncos. And George Paton even said that Malik wanted to go to Pittsburgh. So it'd be interesting to know behind closed doors, like how much say did he have in where he was going? Because that'd be really cool of George Paton in the front office to actually give the player an opportunity to say, would you want to go there or would you want us to do this? So I think it's a great deal for everyone involved. Malik Reed in a great spot behind TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. He's going to play. He's going to be able to make an impact for them. I think it's a good trade all around.
Well, we're wishing Malik Reed the best, and we know that the Broncos will face the Pittsburgh Steelers this year in Pittsburgh. I'll be there, and I look forward to kind of being in the press box and getting to see my man Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. So if you're a Steelers fan and you somehow stumbled upon this podcast to learn a little bit more about Malik Reed, you're getting a fantastic player both on and off the field and a guy who can be a really impact contributor as a role player. He won't, I think also if there's an injury and you need him to start, he can provide you with some serviceable tape. So, wishing Malik Reed the absolute best in Pittsburgh. Now, Sayre, coming up here in just a moment, we're going to find out a little bit more as to how the Broncos formulated their 53-man roster with some insights and some different voices inside the organization. Plus, we talk about maybe some of the surprises that stood out on the actual 53-man roster. You get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Dave. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck or you're struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Dave is the banking app that helps you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, to buy a wedding gift, or to catch up on bills. And you can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. And there's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evo. Member FDIC. Future you will thank you. How did the Denver Broncos come up with their 53-man roster, and how did they use organizational collaboration in order to do so? Thank you so much once again, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Whether you listen to us on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch us on YouTube, do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content coverage, and more every single day all year long. We have you covered here. All right, Sayre, initially going through the 53-man roster, there were some surprises in a sense at some positions, and then there's just the whole entire emphasis that the organization, the way that they viewed things in this process, I was kind of blown away by it. But let's go over some of the surprises first, then we'll talk about the organization's collaboration. Going through this roster, Denver kept 6 total wide receivers. I would say the surprise was really Tyree Cleveland over guys like Kendall Hinton, guys like Brandon Johnson, because Tyree has not been able to participate in training camp, was not able to participate really in the preseason. So the fact that he made the 63-man roster goes to show that, they really believe he can be the biggest impact player for them on special teams. But with that, I think comes some added pressure, right? You made the 53-man roster. Now you have to prove your value on special teams. but you also have to show it on offense as well. For me, this was one of the biggest surprises of the day on the initial 53-man roster. Do you agree with me? And were there any other players that were necessarily big surprises for you?
Well, I would agree with you completely, Cody, and it goes back to something I think Dwayne Stukes said this. I can't remember if it was back in May or June, but he called Tyree Cleveland and Aaron Patrick core special teams players. I guess, you could put a little stock into that at the time because those two guys both made the team, and I would say maybe for a lot of people, they were the two biggest surprises to actually make the team because we didn't see anything from Tyree Cleveland, and you're exactly right. I think with what everybody saw from the receivers, I've certainly seen Cody on Tuesday. I saw a lot of fans up in arms on Twitter over the fact that he made it over other guys that they liked. A lot of people really liked Kendall Hinton. A lot of people really liked Seth Williams. A lot of people really liked this receiver room. Obviously, Brandon Johnson, who will be back at hopefully in some capacity. That was a big surprise to me, Cody. I was a little surprised by Essang Bassey making it. I mean, I said this in a previous podcast. I was being really hard on the cornerback position, but maybe rightly so. I don't know. But he's saying Bassey made the team. Kind of an interesting story. Got cut last year, brought back on waivers. So certainly going to be fascinating to see what the Broncos do at the cornerback position because George Paton was kind of bullish about he thinks Damari Mathis can contribute this year if they need him to. And again, we saw great things from Damari in training camp, but during the preseason games, that cornerback position really struggled. So to me, that's the area right now where I think in terms of surprise or question mark or whatever you want to say in terms of how the Broncos constructed things with those 6 corners, cutting J.R. Reed, the safety, in order to keep 6 corners on the active roster, at least initially, that was a little surprising to me. I mean, not overly surprising. You don't often see teams keep 6 safeties, but J.R. Reed, I thought, was a standout player for the Broncos in preseason. Certainly, I'm sure they'd love to have him back on the practice squad, but we'll see what happens as things unfold here on Wednesday.
Well, and also I think looking at the offensive line, I'm not necessarily a surprise, but I think it's kind of set in stone. I think the message speaks loud and clear. When you look at Graham Glasgow still being on the roster and Luke Wattenberg, those guys were playing center and guard. Like Wattenberg, we know was brought in to be a center, but was playing guard in the preseason. Graham Glasgow, who was a guard, was playing center. So they view both of these guys as those really swing options on the interior of the offensive line. Of course, then you have Calvin Anderson and Cam Fleming, who can be swing options at the offensive tackle position. I kind of like the approach that Denver took there on the O-line there. So happy for Graham Glasgow. I know that for him, he's battled back, and I thought he had a tremendous preseason. I thought he physically mauled dudes. And so if anything happens to any of the starters, I think the Broncos are very confident with his ability to step in and maybe play. And same thing with center. I mean, he can go in and play center. He can play guard. I mean, same thing with Wattenberg. He can play center. He can play guard. They have a multitude of options there. But, Sayre, I think I want to close out today's episode of the show with what I just kind of came away with as something that maybe was a surprise to me. It was just hearing about how Darren Muji and George Paton and the coaching staff formulated the 53-man roster. Now, Darren Muji had said, the process involved the personnel department. They were separate from the coaching staff. The personnel department made their own 53-man roster and kind of talked about it amongst themselves. The coaching staff made their own 53-man roster, and then they brought it all together and they met in the middle there. I think that's a very interesting way. And one thing Muji said was, we didn't want to do it together with the coaches because then we feel like, you get a little too close to it, right? There's a little bit of groupthink involved potentially in situations like that. So we wanted to come up with them in our own silos, come together, and then we were able to talk about why this guy, why not this guy, so on and so forth. I thought it was very interesting, but it just goes to show the Broncos embracing collaboration. And you know what? I feel like that is innovative because I don't think that happens with many other NFL teams.
Yeah, and you certainly don't hear about it if it does happen, right? And George Paton talked about, we want to win now. So everybody's under that umbrella, and he makes that final call, right? So when you're talking about collaborating and having the coaching staff do one thing and the personnel department do another thing, and George Paton is kind of here saying, hey, we're going to be going with a win now approach, that affects things because your personnel department, you might have one person that's saying, well, we really buy this guy's future with the team, but the coaching staff is like, well, this guy can help us right now. So you have to meet in the middle somewhere with some guys, and that's kind of where I think you see guys like Tyree Cleveland and Aaron Patrick come into play, and certain players like Jalen Virgil. Like, was Jalen Virgil one of the 53 best on the team this preseason? Well, I guess I don't know. We'll see. I mean, we didn't see everybody play in the preseason, season, but it was interesting because guys like that are on the cusp, you could kind of see what you're talking about with that collaboration, where the coaching staff might be like, well, we kind of like this guy right now, but we like this guy better, and we like this guy better for the future from the personnel side. It's a really cool blend, a really cool mesh of team building and how George Paton brings that all together. And that was a goal of his. Remember, when he talked about hiring Nathaniel Hackett and that staff, collaboration was always something that they wanted to keep at the forefront. And I think we've seen it in spades, really. It's been great to see. It's been great to hear kind of the curtain pulled back on this process. I love it personally, and I think it's all the more sweet just to know that Russell Wilson is the QB at the helm of this roster, and everything else kind of has a trickle effect from that. So really cool to see the Broncos and how they're doing things and how they're approaching this. Does everybody love every move made? Maybe not, but I guess we're going to see come time to play against the Seattle Seahawks, how these guys all look together, because I'm ready, Cody. I think this is exactly where we're at right now. Everybody's ready to do exactly what Russell Wilson says. Get this ride going. Let's go.
Well, Broncos country, let us know down below in the YouTube comment section. If you're watching us on YouTube, your thoughts on the initial 53-man roster. Keep in mind, over the next couple of days here, we're going to have you cover some roster transactions. The Broncos will practice Wednesday and Thursday. We'll have coverage here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast. Not to mention, when the practice squad is set, you get an episode here on Lockdown Broncos that breaks it all down. We take a look at every angle for you as well. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Lockdown Broncos your first listen or your first watch of the day. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself will be back tomorrow for a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.